Hey everyone, my name is Eric Vento. I'm here with Maury Bass, and this is another podcast of Government to Private, where we explore transition stories from people who have transitioned successfully from all aspects of government service into the private sector. Maury, I've known for quite some time now. I had the privilege of meeting him at a ACES GSX conference for the first time many years ago, it seems like. And we've remained friends ever since. He has graciously volunteered to share his story on our podcast today. And, as we previously discussed, Maury, this is meant to be more of a conversation than anything else. It's just two people
Absolutely.
sharing their stories and, their journey, and in the hopes that it helps at least one person who is in a similar position or considering a similar transition. So Maury, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. And I really appreciate it. Just as a backstory, I probably met you probably over 3 years ago, prior to my retirement from the FBI, on LinkedIn. I never had a LinkedIn account until just prior when I was going to make that public sector to private sector transition. And I was we kind of just sparked some commonalities being in law enforcement. And lo and behold, we met each other at a As Is conference. And we had a cup of coffee together, and I've been following you and following your trajectory on LinkedIn, and it's been great to see your successes in helping people make that transition. So thanks so much for the invitation.
Absolutely, Maury. I really appreciate it. So as we jump into the podcast, can you give us just a high level overview of your, where you came from in federal law enforcement, and, when you started considering potentially getting out and what that transition would look like?
Okay. So just as kind of thumbnail summary of my professional career, I was fortunate enough that I started my career with the FBI as a legislative affairs specialist, and I served in that position for 4 years. And essentially, that was working at FBI headquarters in Washington and being a non-agent representing the FBI in dealing with senators and congressmen and their staff members on Capitol Hill. And that was a great experience. And during that time, the FBI had a 3-year hiring freeze, so they weren't hiring anybody. And I never really thought about being in law enforcement or being an agent. Because my dad was actually a doctor. My grandfather was a lawyer. So I figured, hey, I'm going to go to law school and kind of follow that trajectory. But long story short, I figured that being a lawyer wasn't something I was really passionate about. So as luck would have it, I had a great mentor in college who was a retired FBI agent. And he said, hey, look, you could graduate on time if you switch your major from pre-law to criminal justice. So I started taking criminal justice classes. I became really very interested in criminal justice. I did a couple internships with police agencies. I really got a passion for it, just like you or anybody in law enforcement. You really have to have a passion, because the money, is not as great as people think. And obviously there's a lot of dangers and risk involved, but I really had a passion for law enforcement. And that led me to the FBI. I was lucky enough, as I mentioned, to get this congressional affairs job. They had a hiring freeze. So obviously being an agent is very difficult. It's a numbers game. They had hundreds, if not thousands of people applying for one position. So I figured, hey, I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket. I'm going to, if I don't become an agent, if I don't go into law enforcement, I'm going to go to business. So I started pursuing a master's degree in business, because I figured, hey, that's my second passion. I want to kind of get involved in that. And as luck would have it, the Bureau lifted its hiring freeze in mid-94, and I went through the process. And I literally, from when I applied to my first day at new agents training at FBI Academy at Quantico, was literally less than 90 days, which is pretty unheard of, because they do a background check, and the government is very slow in what they were doing. But they had all these people retiring, just a bunch of people retiring, hundreds of people retiring. So I was very lucky in kind of riding that crest of the wave, the initial crest of the wave, where my whole class was former FBI non-agent people. So I went through new agents training November of 1994, finished in February of 1995. And then it was all needs of the Bureau. So all of the big offices like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, got all the new agents because, they're high expense, they're very expensive areas. Nobody wants to live there, and all that. So luckily I got shipped to Los Angeles division, and the special agent in charge at that time said, hey, look, what do you want to work? He gave everybody, all the new agents, a survey. And I said, I want to work violent crime and I want to be in Orange County, California. And I got those choices. And that's crazy. And I've never been to Orange County. It was before the internet. So the only reason I heard about Orange County is that there was a female new agent in a class behind me who was from Orange County and said, hey, look, if you have the opportunity to go to Orange County, go there because you won't be, it's a beautiful county. It's right near the beach. You got Newport Beach, Laguna and all that. So luckily the first 4 years I was working violent crimes and drugs and gangs and all that. After that, I worked a little bit of white collar very briefly. That wasn't really my wheelhouse. And subsequently, I spent most of my time working domestic terrorism or counterterrorism issue. This is way before September 11th, where the Bureau really didn't care about counterterrorism as it does now. A lot of the efforts of the FBI before September 11th were like violent crime, fugitives, bank robberies, interstate theft of stolen property, law enforcement cooperation matters. So I was on the counterterrorism squad. I really enjoyed it. Actually, it was before counterterrorism was called counterterrorism. I was essentially the only domestic terrorism agent in Orange County, California. And it was funny because I'm Filipino and here I am chasing white supremacists and black supremacists. And it's just a very weird dynamic that my supervisor selected me out of everybody else. But I enjoyed it. It was I had a lot of sources, good cases. I put a lot of bad guys in jail. And then obviously September 11th happened. The Bureau, and just like law enforcement, transitioned drastically. I was one of the first founding members of the Orange County Joint Terrorism Task Force. And out of about 25 years as an agent, I spent probably about 20 of those years on multi-agency task forces. So I got to work with state and local investigators, detectives, state investigators, and some of my best friends to this day are state and local investigators. So even though I'm an FBI agent, most of my colleagues were state and local agencies, as well as some federal agencies like HSI or CBP or whatever. And it was a great experience. I was a street agent, field agent, investigator for about 15 years. Had a chance to promote as a squad supervisor, running some joint terrorism task forces in Riverside and Long Beach, overseeing the LAX resident agency, which is like the third biggest airport in the West Coast. And I had a chance to serve as the executive director for the Joint Regional Intelligence Center, the JRIC. And I only say that is because like in the FBI or federal law enforcement, usually when you promote up, you have to move all around the country. And my family is very important to me, and I had little ones at that time, and my wife had a good job. I didn't want to do that. So I would have rather stayed as a street agent, but fortunately I was able to find that path of promoting up a little bit, just within the greater Los Angeles area. And it was a great experience, another task force environment. And it was just awesome. I really enjoyed the job. The last few years, because the FBI had like a 7-year up and out, where basically you serve as a frontline supervisor for 7 years. And then after that, you either have to promote up and move or step down. And I was already at the late stages of my game where I didn't want to do that. I don't want to move my family. And it wasn't really beneficial cost-wise. So I decided basically to step down. I was fortunate enough to serve as like the InfraGard coordinator, which is the FBI's public-private sector coordinator. I was able to do a lot of international training for the FBI, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then, to your question about when did I think about making that transition? So I never really thought about like after the FBI, because I really enjoyed being in law enforcement. I thought the people were the best human beings that I have ever worked with. Just like any law enforcement officer, you are involved with critical incidences. Your friends get hurt, your friends get killed, and I experienced that. I had friends, local agencies, local police department officers who were killed. My best friend in the FBI, Stephen Shaw, FBI agent, he was killed in he was an HRT operator. He fell out of a helicopter doing a maritime operation. So, that was like my passion. And post bureau or after law enforcement, it's always hard for law enforcement officers to find that next mission, that next passion. So, for the FBI, we could retire at 50 with 20 years in, or we get kicked out at 57. So I didn't want to wait until I was 57, because we all know that there is age, I hate to say discrimination, but people, private companies, they want to get younger people. They want to get people who are experienced, but they don't want like somebody who is in a retirement mode or just getting ready to just spend a couple months there or a year and then just retire. They want somebody who could still contribute. So I started my my quest to make that transition about a year and a half prior to actually retiring on February 2020. And to your point, Eric, there's a lot of things that I did wrong that I wish that I knew now, that it would have saved me a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of angst. But I think that, like anything else in life, the adversity just makes you a stronger, better person. Because I tell people who contact me, law enforcement, don't be discouraged. When you're applying to jobs, you're applying to like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and you don't get any response back, or you don't get the interview, or they ghost you, or you get an interview, but you're not selected. Don't take it personally. You just got to keep on pacing yourself. You got to think that, hey, I have something of value that I could bring to the private sector, to the corporate security. And you got to rely on your family, your friends, your social network to help you keep on going, because it is depressing to get constant negatives. And for most people, they will constantly get more negatives than positives. Everybody that I've talked to get more closed doors than open doors. But you have to keep on having faith in yourself. You have to come up with a strategy. You have to reach out to professionals like yourself or peers that may have a contact in a particular company, or who've already successfully made that transition, to give you tips. And obviously, we live in the day of the internet. There's so much information that I glean from the internet, from reading books about how to make transitions, how to interview, how to put together a cover letter, how to make a resume. But there's also so many companies and people who can help you for, obviously, for a cost, and that's fine too, because they could see things in your resume, and they could talk to you via an interview that you might not think is valuable, but they could flush it out and put it on paper, because that resume and cover letter is just a possible way to enter a business, enter corporate security, or whatever you want to do. That needs to be dialed in. It needs to really reflect who you are and what you bring to the table. And there was so many times that I felt like, man, I'm just getting a beat down. I'm just not getting, I'm getting ghosted. I spent hours on crafting my resume and cover letter, and then you submit it on the company portal, and it takes you hours to do that. And then you submit it at 10 o'clock, and by 10:10, you get a form letter saying that you're no longer considered because your competencies aren't as competitive as everybody else. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how can they know that after 10 minutes of me submitting it on the portal? So those things happen. Most of the time, it's a computer that gets back to the candidate, the applicant. Most of the time that happens. There's a lot of screening on the computer. usually the HR person, they don't really know law enforcement, what we could bring to the table, or they're like some young kid, some young HR person, which is fine, but they don't really know all of the skills, the hard skills and soft skills and contacts that law enforcement officers can bring to the table. And I think that's the challenge, because for us, we're thinking, man, I did all this stuff. Like, I arrested all these people. I put these cases together. I built these relationships, and they don't see the value in that. So, long story short, you just got to pace yourself, and you got to utilize the tools that are out there, and you got to have a support network. That's going to be like the long game that you have to play. And there's a famous guy, I think his name is Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone, I believe his name is. He's a big real estate. Cardone. Yeah. He's a big real estate investor in Miami. And look up his YouTube video on interviewing. And even though he's very over the top and he's very gregarious and very energetic, he said something that's burnt in my brain, and that is, looking for a job is a job. You have to treat it, even though you have a 9-to-5 job, you have to treat it, looking for a job, as a job. You have to spend 5, 10, even more hours, crafting your cover letter, crafting your resume, setting up alerts, making the network on LinkedIn, or calling people who might know somebody who knows somebody at the company. So it is a job. And if you treat it that way, you're going to be more diligent in doing the best job you can, and also kind of drive that consistency to accomplish that goal that you want to accomplish, which is to find that next job that kind of drives you, fulfills you as a person, fulfills the mission that you're looking for. So, as I mentioned, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about this whole public sector, private sector transition, because, it was a challenge. I thought, and, I'm a pretty humble person. I'm very low key. People who know me, but I figured, hey, I did all these great things in the FBI. I built these cases. I had these sources. I traveled internationally. I have a CPP. I have an advanced degree and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's all about relationships, and it's all about your value add to the company, because the company, as you know, they don't understand and they don't care how many people you arrested or what kind of cases you put together. They want to know what you as a person could bring to the company. What hard and soft skills can you bring to the company? So that's really important for law enforcement people to understand. As I mentioned, I get contacted every month by various law enforcement agencies, people I know, or friends or whatever, because, I'm in private sector, corporate security now. And that's what I tell them, that they have to kind of change their way of thinking. When they're interviewing for like a sergeant's test, a lieutenant test, a captain's test, supervisory special agent test, an ASAC test, assistant special agent in charge for the FBI. That's totally different from looking for a job in corporate sector, in private sector.
Preach.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what people have to understand. Private sector is not going to change the way it looks at how they hire. You have to change your dynamic, your strategy on meeting their needs. And I made a lot of mistakes going, when I started this journey of looking for, post FBI career. And as I mentioned, I'm passionate about it because I could think of those days that, man, I felt down, because I wasn't selected. I got a form letter. I felt like I did great on the interview, but I didn't get a call for the next level. Or I was at the final stages. I was one of the final selected, but I didn't get that final selection. So, just like everything else, I think that adversity really helps you get stronger.
Amen to that, brother. Like, a lot of what you said really resonated with me. Like, and first, A, thank you for sharing. That was amazing. B, you mentioned like, don't take it personal, and what I guess what conflicts with that statement is when you're going through the process and you're submitting all these applications and you're getting all these rejections, it is intensely personal, and it feels intensely personal. And, what it kind of resonates with what you just said about being able to articulate your value, because I think the one thing that it really resonates with me is, in the financial services industry within like anti-money laundering and fraud, there's a term called KYC, which is know your customer. And that basically says, we need to know who we're banking with in order to mitigate fraud, mitigate risk, et cetera. It's deeply tied into, the U.S. Patriot Act and other ordinances and laws and statutes. But from a resume perspective and from a transition perspective, I prefer to think of it in terms of KYA, which is know your audience. Because just when you said about like, well, people don't care about the number of DUIs or number of arrests or all the RICOs that you investigated or something like that, you have to think about who's looking on the other end of that job application process. And you have to assume that it's going to be someone who most likely has no idea what you've done. They don't know what that means. They don't know what the terminology consists of. They don't know how it correlates to the job that they're hiring for. It's up to you to come up with a corporate language to say, all of these arrests, these international operations that I've run, the relationships that I've built overseas, everything that I've done, I need to correlate that to the job application or the job description that I'm applying to. And if I do that and I'm successful, then whoever's reading on the other end will be able to say, you know what? I don't really know what law enforcement does other than what I see on cops or the local news or something like that. But the way that he had described what he's done, the number of investigations that he's conducted, the specific typologies or the specific crimes, et cetera, or even more of a story of this was the problem, this was the, something that he implemented, and this was the measurable result. Everyone can identify with that because you're showing process. You're giving them a window into here's how I solve problems. Here's how I communicate. And ultimately, that's why every single job description and or interview is made up of both what did you do, but also the behavioral questions of, tell me about a time that you experienced conflict in the workplace. What did you do? And people want to see you process out loud. They want to see how you respond to conflict or how you use interpersonal dynamics. And every single skill that you have attained in your law enforcement career, whether you were a patrol officer for a 5-man department or whether you were a SAC at a major field office, every single skill is directly translatable. The private sector, it's just in a different language.
Absolutely.
And as soon as you, I guess, make that mental transition, which, it's not an overnight switch by any means, but as soon as you recognize, okay, I need to ensure that what I'm saying in my resume or anywhere else is seen, heard, and appreciated from a corporate perspective, then it makes things a lot more, transparent, and it makes things a lot more understandable.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned at the end, relationships are everything. So what were some of the major things that you did that you really attribute to a successful transition?
Okay, so just to kind of go back a little bit to your point about being able to communicate your value add. As you know, there is a method called the STAR method, which is situation, task, action, result. And that's where I tell people when they're preparing for an interview or when they're laying out their resume, you got to look at everything, all the highlights of your career through that prism, the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. Because you're trying to convey a story in a very short period of time so that a non-law enforcement person can relate to it. And I think, to your point, that's where a lot of law enforcement or even military get jammed up, because they, for the most part, they don't want to they're humble people. They don't want to talk about all the things that they were involved with. Or if they do, they overcomplicate it by using too many acronyms. They stress the number of arrests or crimes solved, but you got to make it relatable as to, you know, your interpersonal skills, your writing skills, your way to deal with critical incidences, things like that, that you can relate to somebody who's in private sector. So I think that's really, really important. And kind of to jump forward a little bit to answer your question about just making contacts and all that. You know, I see it on your postings all the time on LinkedIn. And, you know, you do a really great job of like connecting people. It's just so important to reestablish contacts with people who are your former coworkers, because people know people. And if they know that Eric is a competent, great person to have on your team, they're going to be your biggest advocate for looking for jobs, to being the advocate at that company, to say, hey, out of those hundreds of applications, please pull Eric's application. And that helps. That is a tremendous benefit. Additionally, you know, we live in the internet world where in LinkedIn, I personally have seen postings at companies, and I looked on LinkedIn, try to find out who the HR manager is or the decision maker, and I would just send them a short message saying, hey sir, or hey ma'am, you know, I'm Maury Bass. I applied to this senior director, the security director position. I feel that I'd be a great fit for your company, and here's attaches my cover letter. You know, I'd love to have a few minutes of your time to engage and see what I could bring to your company. And for the most part, one out of 3 times, people will get back with you. I've had people spend 30 minutes helping me, coaching me, and saying, hey, this is how you do it, you know, or this is our company values these attributes and this kind of employee, or this is how our previous security director was successful. And for the most part, people like to talk about their company, about themselves. And you know, I totally tell people, don't be scared to reach out to people, because what's the worst that could happen? They just
Absolutely.
ghost. That's
Yeah.
it.
And you
But
haven't
it's a
lost
win-win.
anything.
Yeah, you haven't lost anything. But when people contact you, it's just another person, another team member on your side that could possibly help you in your career transitioning, or maybe a career in the future, because they'll remember Eric. Yeah, I had a great conversation with Eric a year ago, and man, I think he's a great person for this job that's coming up. Let me call him up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic point. And, you know, to kind of segue into that, I tell people all the time that, you know, I've been laid off 4 times in the private sector. I mean, there's not a lot of stability depending on what company you're in, where the state of the job market is, the economy, et cetera. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rule, depending on whether you work in-house or contract and stuff like that. But, you know, I tell people that, you know, out of the multiple jobs that I've had, more than 3 have come from relationships. More than 3 have come from me not applying to a job, but instead someone reached out to me and said, hey, I think you'd be a great fit. Are you open to having a conversation? You know, and
get those contacts. That's the best way.
Exactly. And, you know, it's, I just had a conversation with someone earlier today who was really discouraged and really struggling with the process and questioning, you know, themselves about, are my skills really valued? You know, do people really want my experience? Because, you know, everything that I've done so far has suggested no. And so I was really able to have a fantastic conversation with them about, here's what you're doing. Here's what you might want to consider doing differently. You know, I know that you've really struggled, that you're really depressed about, you know, the transition, but, you know, there's a whole army of people out here who have transitioned before you, and we are here to support you. We're here to, you know, help you leverage our connections, our relationships to help you get in that job that you want to be in, you know? And I think as law enforcement officers, but also many aspects of government, like the military and the intelligence community. We're naturally private people. We're naturally, we don't like to share information. We don't like to ask for help, in a lot of situations. But the transition is a place where you do need to ask for help, and
Absolutely.
you need to recognize that through this process, every single one of us have been where, you are. Every single one of us has been in a position where we're like, what am I doing wrong? And eventually we had someone help us, whether it was someone at the company, whether it was someone we met at an organization, we met on LinkedIn, whatever the case may be. They were able to give us help that significantly changed how we approach this process. And it just goes to show you that at the end of the day, qualifications may get you in the door, but people are the reason why you stay.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
It's just something that I marvel at, because this job that I have, not only my full-time job, but my part-time job doing this enables me to meet with just a wide range of people from all walks and backgrounds. And just hearing their story, every single one of them is unique and their journey is unique, but the overall framework is consistent. It's, I'm transitioning out. I don't know what to do. My resume isn't getting hits. How does this networking thing work? How does LinkedIn work? What do I do? And they're just looking for direction. They're looking for, does someone understand my story? And, it's a blessing, and, it's a blessing to have you on this podcast and to hear about your story and your journey. And I'm sure it'll be a blessing to a great many people who watch this in the coming days. What are one or two things or one or two pieces of advice that you'd like to pass along to whoever's watching this?
Well, it's funny you asked that because, when I was kind of thinking about this interview and thinking about you, and I want to kind of get my thoughts together. Obviously, we hit on the topics that are critically important. People who are new to looking for a private sector, a job in private sector, coming from government after working in government for a long time. Obviously in government, in law enforcement, we have stability. Since I've been in private sector, we had COVID. It shut down a lot of businesses. A lot of people got laid off. And in my current position, I work for a Fortune 50 company. We've had 3 layoffs. So to your point, Eric, you were laid off 4 times. And obviously that is detrimental because, you have a family to feed, you have responsibilities. And on LinkedIn, I see a lot of people who have just been laid off from the current economic situation. A lot of tech companies have laid off people. So our discussion, I think it's not only pertinent to law enforcement professionals, but like anybody who wants to work HR or work in marketing or legal services or whatever. I think that the points that we talked about, such as the importance of connections, the importance of just analyzing and having a hard discussion about your value add and how you can convey that, the importance of making sure your cover letter and resume and your LinkedIn profile are dialed in, be it you get one of your friends, your spouse helping you, or hiring a professional like yourself to look at that, because having another person look at your cover letter and resume and LinkedIn profile really helps in kind of flushing out and getting to the bones of what you're trying to convey. Another point is the importance of setting job alerts. Utilize the internet. You've got Indeed, you have Glassdoor, you have all usajobs.com. There's so many of these websites that I've used to set up alerts on specific jobs and locations and pay and all that I'm interested in. And then you get those alerts. And that's really a good lead to kind of focus your attention and look at those alerts and kind of look at the kind of companies and environment that you might want to work in, and kind of focus on those jobs that you want to apply for. Another tip that I'd have is that you should apply to a variety of positions. Just don't, for like prior law enforcement, they're always thinking about, hey, let's go into corporate security or some type of security field. You know, if you have a background that is, you're a guru in HR or legal or a CPA, or you have some kind of specialized skill, a writer, for example, you know, broaden your horizons to different jobs. Your first priority might be, hey, I feel like I need to go into corporate security, but you might have another second or tertiary skill that you might want to develop. So look, don't be pigeonholed on like security only. You got to like broaden your horizon, because you never know what doors will open. The next tip that I wish I learned was to pace yourself. You know, have a support network. I mean, my wife was tremendously, you know, she dealt with me, bitching and complaining and being sad for myself. And she helped me craft my resume and cover letter. And, you know, just having friends and family that are understanding and want to help you succeed. That's critically important, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint, unless, you know, you happen to be the lucky person where somebody just picks you out of the blue. But usually that doesn't happen. And with that, is you have to have be organized, because for me, I applied to hundreds of jobs, and sometimes you hear back from people within a week. Sometimes you don't hear from them for a month, a couple months. And what I use that worked for me is I use an application called Mr. Task, and it's basically, you could use any type of application, but basically it houses all the jobs, your cover letter that you sent them, the link, some company information, key people at that company, their annual report, all this information in one place. So when you do get that call a week or 2 weeks or a month, you can just look at your application and then pull that information. Because I can't tell you how many times I've been called 2 or 3 times. Like I had interviews, or I had to respond to a company that was interested in me, 3 times in 1 week. And it was kind of like, oh, what company? When did I apply for that? Which resume did I send to them? So you want to make sure it's dialed in. You got a process. You have a method to your madness. And lastly, as I mentioned, looking for a job is a job. You can't do it half-baked. You have to be committed. You have to be all in. You have to sell yourself. And that's what's really important. Your number one goal should be to get an interview. I'd applied to jobs that I felt like was way over my background. But all I wanted to do is get that interview, because that interview, even though you might not be the right person for the job, it's going to give you a chance to hone your craft of interviewing. And most of the interviews are via video. And you know how awkward that is, to talk to a screen and tell your whole life story. So the more interviews you go on, either on video or in person, do it. Because it's going to make you a better person. It's going to make you more dialed in. You're going to know your cover letter, your resume. You're going to know your stories that you want to highlight in that STAR method I talked about. And you're just going to feel better about yourself, because you're going to have a confidence in knowing exactly what you bring to the table.
Could not agree with you more, Maury. And, you know, you mentioned a really good point with the interviewing. You know, most people who are in, the government, they think they do pretty well in interviews, but the corporate world is different, because you're having to articulate your government experience to the corporate world. And that's not something that a lot of people have experience with unless you've been in corporate interviews. And,
Absolutely.
I tell people all the time that, absent going on an actual interview, there's a resource within LinkedIn. If you go to the jobs section on the left-hand side, there's an interview tab. and it gives you the top 26 questions that you're most likely to encounter in an interview setting. And it goes across all these different industries. And corporate security is inevitably not one of the categories on there, but it doesn't matter, because those questions that you encounter, like, tell me about yourself, or what do you expect to make compensation wise, or what is your strengths, what's your greatest weakness, whatever the case may be.
How did you manage people?
Yeah, exactly. Those are all questions that every single job tends to ask during the interview process. And so getting a sense of how you're going to respond to that, and how you should approach that question from a framework perspective, just like you mentioned STAR. I mean, when I'm going into an interview, I usually have the STAR method above my screen. And so I have it mapped out. Okay, I'm going to talk about this. These are the examples I'm going to use if I get asked. So I'm not having to, come up with it on the fly,
Absolutely.
And because when you come up with things on the fly, you tend to make mistakes. You tend to either rush into it, you tend to exaggerate, you tend to, just let everything come out, so to speak, in my opinion, at least. But when you have things mapped out, then it makes it a lot more concise when you're in the interview stage, especially when okay, I'm going to talk about the situation, the task, the action, the result. And that's exactly what the corporate recruiters are looking for anyway. So by providing your information in the format that they're already used to and what they expect, you not only make it a lot more easier for them to comprehend your experience, but you come across as that much more professional. And that's a really good point to make.
Exactly. And you're telling a story. You want your story to be short and sweet. And with the story, you're also trying to build that likability factor. Because they're thinking, hey, is Maury the kind of guy that I want to work with? Is he going to be a likable guy? Is he going to relate to my coworkers? So you're trying to convey that. You don't want to come across as like a hard-nosed person. You want to be the type of person that they want to add on your team. And to your point, with the STAR method and having these cues on above the video screen. I mean, that's the beauty of having these interviews via on the video,
right?
Because you could put those keywords, you could put those stories, you could put those those things that you want to convey to them, and that's the great thing. Now, when you go in for the in-person interview, you don't have all those tabs, and you can't bring your notebook and refer to them. You have to basically be able to articulate them and kind of draw on them. But one thing I really enjoyed is I enjoyed the interview because it was a challenge. Because in law enforcement, we have to communicate with people. We have to build relationships. We have to ensure or help people kind of de-escalate. So as law enforcement professionals, I think that's something that we already have, those skills to do that. But to your point, you've got to speak in a corporate, private sector language. And that is the most important thing that I tell people when they're going out to do the interview is you've gotta like summarize what the highlights of your career is, what you bring to the table, and you've got to give them a short, sweet story.
Amen. That brings up a really good point because, I was doing a conversation the other day with an ATF agent, and he kept on telling me, I keep on making it to the middle interview, but I'm not making it any further. I think it's a problem with my interview skill. I'm like, okay, well, there's one way to find out. Let's do a mock interview. And so I asked him a very commonly asked question, which is, tell me about a time that you experienced conflict in the workplace. How did you approach it? How did you handle it? And what was the eventual result? And what recruiters and what hiring managers and whoever else is involved in the process, what they're looking for is a quick 2 to 3 minute blurb on a very simplistic example that they can say, okay, he approached this situation professionally. He utilized problem solving, de-escalation, active listening, whatever the case may be, and they came to an amicable solution and were able to move on. And this guy gave me literally like a 20-minute diatribe on a contentious relationship he had with a former CI. And I let him go through the whole thing. And then I said, okay, I know why you're not moving on to the final stage,
That's a red flag.
Exactly. And I was like, no one knows what a CI is. No one knows about the relationship that exists between a handler and a CI. No one's able to relate to that except, in the rare exception that whoever's interviewing you is from law enforcement, you know. But once I explained this is what they're looking for and this is how you need to approach this, it was like the light bulb went off. He's like, dang it, now I know why I'm
Yes.
not moving on. But
Yeah.
if no
Brevity
one,
is so
yeah,
important.
I was like, if no one tells you what the expectations are, or what they want you to do, then you're going to fall back upon what and I tell people all the time who are like, well, I wish I'd known that. I'm like, how are you supposed to know that?
Mhm.
Like, you don't know what you don't know. You can't just suddenly know the information that you're supposed to,
Mhm.
and that's why I think it's just so important for people to watch podcasts like this and to do their research and talk to people who have made the transition before them to, potentially learn some of these common mistakes that
Mhm.
we see.
Mhm.
Obviously, everyone's going to make mistakes,
And
but
don't be scared of failure. I mean, in law
yeah,
enforcement, we're all type A people. We all want to succeed. We all want to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, sometimes there's an X factor. Sometimes you could have the best interview, your paperwork is great, but you just are not selected because of
yeah,
one reason or another. But if you can go into those interviews feeling that I did the best I can given my background, what I could bring to the table, you're going to be satisfied. But I tell people, your first goal shouldn't be getting the job. Your first goal should be getting the interview, getting your foot in the door, because that they're giving you an opportunity to audition for this position. And it is an audition because you have to clearly communicate your value add in a very short period of time. And you've got to establish that likability factor.
amen. Yeah, it's a bi-directional interview.
Yes,
They're
absolutely.
interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them.
Absolutely. In
And
fact, it's funny. You kind of jarred my memory. I was on an interview with a Fortune 10 company, and I was very prepared. I wore a suit. I showed up 15 minutes early. I get to this place, and they were 15 minutes late. They dressed up like they were going to going lumberjacking, and we had an interview, and they were not organized. They didn't take any notes. They were so unprepared, inarticulate. And I thought to myself, I can't work for this company if these are the type of people that are actually recruiting people. So that's another thing that, as people seeking jobs in corporate sector, in the corporate arena, you have to make sure that you want to work for that company or work for that person or work for that work with that team. Because I found out having the interview, I really don't want to work here.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So
It's a,
those are
it's a
things to really
two-way
consider.
street.
It's a
Yeah,
two-way street. It's a relationship.
even if, and I tell people, like, your qualifications get you in the door, but it's your ability to relate to the people, especially the people you're going to be working with, your actual team members, your direct manager, that ultimately most likely get you the job. Because you can be the most highly qualified person in the room, but if you can't get along with people, it's going to be a quick job.
Yeah, they don't want
You
to
know,
hire you. They're not going to hire you. They don't want to hire somebody that's going to be a problem
right?
right off the bat, or somebody who can't answer a question succinctly and on point and something, and be able to convey their ideas clearly.
Absolutely. Well, brother, I know we're coming to the end of our podcast. Is there any other advice or anything else that you want to say to anyone who potentially is going to watch this?
Well, I think we hit all the major points. I mean, obviously, this can be a whole. You can get a PhD in trying to find a job in corporate security or the corporate arena or making that transition. But I think that we've hit a lot of very salient points, and they are important. As I mentioned, looking for a job is a job. You have to do your due diligence. You have to really look within yourself to see what's going to be fulfilling to you. Because in law enforcement, at least for me, it was a passion. And in trying to job that's something like that is very difficult in the corporate side. I mean, I enjoy what I do now, but it's a different type of mission. It's a different type of passion. So a lot of people, especially in the military, when you're in the military, a lot of people just have a hard time transitioning, and it's no fault of their own. It's because they're that kind of person, and they've trained to that high speed, and you just can't switch it off because it's part of their personality. So, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to reach out to people, reach out to professionals like yourself, because at the end of the day, there's so many resources out there. The internet, there's so many videos, there's so many people willing to carve out some free time, or for paid time at low cost, that could basically take your job hunting skills to the next level. And that's what I have to convey, is basically just keep on going. Don't be discouraged. Keep on having a support network. Look for new contacts, rekindle old contacts, and just take it in stride. Don't take it personally.
Words to live by, brother. Well, hey, thank you so much for participating here and sharing your journey and your story. Really, really appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. And I enjoy looking at your company and trajectory, and all the things that you do every week to help people. It's a great thing that you're doing and filling that gap. And I really appreciate the opportunity to spend this time with you and the audience.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, guys, please have a great day. If you listen to this and you see value in it, please connect with Maury and myself. Please let him know, what you got out of it and what really hit home for you. And if there's anything that we can do to facilitate your transition, all you have to do is ask. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eric.